Welcome back, my quiver of capitalists, to AP Economics, presented by Cobranomics, the all-American American history teacher, gold standard of economics, and your sensei of supply side, Professor G here. And today we are going to finish up Unit 2 with a little bonus lesson called Elasticity of Demand. Essentially, that while you have the law of demand, not all products have the same demand curve. Some products are more consumer sensitive or elastic to each other. Let's take Facebook versus MetroCards. Right now, as a student, both products are free to you. However, if, let's say, Facebook went from being free to $5 a month, and MetroCards, whatever price they are now, Professor G does not ride with the public, but let's say they go to $5 a month, would you still have Facebook? And would you still have MetroCards? Odds are, with Facebook, due to things like, as you're thinking about this in your own mental survey, you might say, fine, there are alternatives to Facebook, that Facebook is not a need, that $5 a month is too much for these. Versus a MetroCard, well, in New York City, you need the Metro service, the MTA. It's either that, or to walk, bike, or drive. But MetroCards are essential to travel in a big city. So, whereas Facebook, you might see a drop-off, a steeper drop-off in quantity demanded, you won't see that steeper drop-off in MetroCards. So thus, while they both adhere to the law of demand, their demand curves are going to be slightly different. For Facebook, you are going to see a demand curve that's a bit flatter. Versus a MetroCard, you are going to see a steeper demand curve. What does this show? This shows that as the price changes for Facebook, as we go from P and increase that to P1, we see a very noticeable difference as we go from Q to Q1. It is very sensitive that Facebook would be an elastic product. Notice that this small change in price created this very large change in quantity demanded. So we'd say Facebook is an elastic product in that the quantity demanded is very sensitive to the change in price. Versus a MetroCard, we notice it's still a demand curve, however shaped a little differently, reflecting the properties of the MetroCard. That as the price of the MetroCard increases, we see a much smaller change in quantity demanded. The MetroCard is more of an inelastic product. That no matter change in, even though there is a change in price, and even though there is a decrease in quantity demanded, it is a not as noticeable decrease as with Facebook. So let's take a look at what makes something elastic versus inelastic. And there's several different ways to tell. We're going to do a mathematical analysis, a graphical analysis, and a property analysis. So now we're going to take a look at, well, how do we know if a product is elastic or inelastic? We're going to take a look at our graphical analysis, and then a mathematical analysis, and then we're going to take a look at a property analysis. First, continuing with the graphical analysis, elastic is the more horizontal the demand curve is, the more elastic it is. If it is perfectly horizontal, we would say that is perfectly elastic. Inelastic, the more vertical the curve is, the more inelastic the product is. And a perfectly vertical curve would be perfectly inelastic. And then your basic demand curve we would call unit elastic. And really, if we took these curves and we did a mathematical equation of them, and we took a look, you will never have to do this equation. You just have to remember these three results of the equation. So on a multiple choice test, they'll give you a description of what happens to the product, and then they'll give you the ratio, and then you'll have to say, based on this ratio, the answer, what is the product? So really, you just have to remember the outcome of this ratio. Is it greater than 1, less than 1, or equal to 1? Is the main thing you have to remember. You do not actually have to calculate it, you just have to know the math that is being referenced. So it's essentially basically comparing the percent change in quantity demanded to the percent change in price. If the percent change in quantity demanded is greater than 1, a 1-to-1 rate is greater than a 1-to-1 ratio to the percent change in price, the product is elastic. Or if the percent change in total revenue versus the percent change in price, same thing, or the total revenue decreases, sometimes that appears, so let's say the price goes up, yet total revenue goes down. How does that happen? That is because the product is elastic. Too many people stopped buying, even though the price increased. You might say, well, is the business making money? No, the product is too sensitive to that change in price. Inelastic is that the percent change is less than 1. So the percent change in price to the percent change in quantity demanded is less than 1, so it is inelastic. Or total revenue actually increases. So if the city raises the Metro card, if the city raises the tolls, these are things that we cannot escape using. And even though there will be a slight decrease in quantity demanded, overall, because that quantity demanded is changing at a ratio of less to 1, the total revenue of the city will increase still. And unit elastic means that this percent change is a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, or essentially your standard demand curve. Now let's take a look at property analysis. Let's take a look at the characteristics of a product and see if they fit into making it elastic or inelastic. And this is something a business would normally do before it raises the price and then mathematically finds out its total revenue is decreasing. So the more checks we're going to give the item, the more elastic the item is. So elasticity is to an extent. So let's say a television. Television is technically a luxury, although it is in 2020, it is borderline a need for entertainment, but we'll still get a check, maybe like a slight check, a check minus we'll give a television. Cross-price elasticity. Are there lots of substitutes? Be careful. So cross-price elasticity, this is the word that's going to appear on the test, but really what it means is to what extent are there a lot of substitutes for the product. And for television, yes, there are lots of substitutes. There are lots of different brands. You could even have a computer or a laptop instead of the television as well. So there are lots of substitutes for a television. This gets a good check. Time elasticity. Can the purchase be pushed off? Do you need a new television right away? No, you can keep pushing it off. The old one is serviceable. So television can be pushed off. And think about how these things so far contrast with Metro cards. Metro card is a need, not a luxury for most people in the city. Metro card does not have many viable substitutes besides bike riding, walking, and driving, which might not be viable substitutes for people. Metro card traveling to your job cannot be forestalled. So MetroCard does not get a check for that either. So far MetroCard is all X's for these. And income elasticity. Does the product take up a large portion of the income? A television is several $100s, so yes, that would take up a large portion of your monthly income. So a television is a very elastic product. That televisions really cannot escalate in price too dramatically because they hit all four of these check marks. And even though with the MetroCard, if it went to $5 a month, if you have to use it twice a day, a MetroCard would probably also get a check here as well, but it would have 3 X's, so it would be mostly inelastic, a MetroCard. Again, it is to an extent are they elastic, to an extent are they more inelastic, because those demand curves can vary. For our last part of this segment, we are going to take a look at what are the implications of government policy raising taxes on business, depending if those businesses are elastic or inelastic. Just a blanket tax on businesses, on capital gains tax and business income taxes, and what happens if the business is elastic or inelastic. So the tax incidence refers to who does the tax fall on when the government creates a tax on businesses, like a capital gains tax, a corporate tax, and corporate income tax. What happens? Who does the tax fall on when the government creates this tax? So who receives the tax incidence? Who does the tax really fall on? So for an elastic product, so now the business has a higher input cost. It's may pay more state, local, or federal taxes in some form. And a business, if it's an elastic product, well, the business cannot raise the price to cover this increased input cost, because if it raises the price, it's going to have a dramatic decrease in quantity demanded, and therefore its total revenue will decrease. So the business must absorb the tax somehow and deal with the tax. So for an elastic product, we would say the tax incidence falls squarely on the business. An inelastic business, however, because it is more of a need, there are less substitutes, there's less forestalling, and perhaps less of a monthly budget, the business can raise the price. And because the business can raise the price, that means the tax incidence actually falls on the consumer, that the consumer pays the government tax, because the business can literally just pass the tax straight down to the consumer in the form of higher prices, and now the business can cover those increased input costs by making the consumer cover it, because the business knows that if it raises its prices, there won't be that much of a dramatic decrease in quantity demanded, and its input costs will now be, its increased input costs of those new taxes will now be covered thanks to passing that cost down to the consumer. And so we would say the tax incidence falls on the consumer. And for elastic products, we should be careful as well, because, well, if the business is absorbing the tax and the business's input costs are increasing, businesses go into survival of the fittest mode. And so what are businesses going to do if they have all these increased input costs? Well, they're going to take it out on the workers, perhaps in the form of less hours, or if the business can't make all these new payments, the business closed down, that's the worker as well. So unfortunately, when government raises taxes, they wind up being paid by the households in the form as the households being workers when the tax falls on the business and the business must absorb the full incidence of the tax. Or if it's an inelastic product, the inelastic business can take that tax and pass it straight down to the consumer in the form of higher prices, and now the consumer is essentially paying the tax for the business. So we would say the tax incidence falls on the consumer. So increasing taxes on businesses, again, not coming down politically one way or the other, just the economic reality. Remember, no feelings in Cobranomics, just economic and graphical reality, that the tax incidence, either an elastic business, falls on the business, and if it's an inelastic business, gets passed down right to the consumer. This has been Elasticity, and congratulations, Unit 2 is now complete. We will see you for Unit 3 Remember, in Cobranomics, whether it is your money, your mind, or your body, invest hard, invest often, and no feelings. Money never sleeps. We'll see you next time.